From a pitching perspective, Monday's MLB DFS slate is not a bad one because we have both Tyler Glasnow and Walker Bueller. So for cash games, you're good. You can pick your favorite there and proceed forward. For stacking, it's not a good cash game slate. There is not a single stack on this slate that I can turn to and say, okay, on a large 15-game slate, I'd be looking to stack this team. There are no stacks that fit that mold for today. So what we got to do is dig into those stacks, try to find ones that are most palatable, and see if we can justify using them in cash games. To me, the answer will probably be no. It doesn't seem like a great cash game slate to me, but we'll dig in and try to find out how we're going to play things for today in MLB DFS. Welcome on into the solo shot. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, here to get you set for Monday's 10-game main slate with lock set for 7:05 this evening. There are a couple of weather notes for today. There's a good chance of rain in Philadelphia for the Phillies and the Brewers. The rain odds increase as the game goes along, so it's not where they should start that game. Just have to worry if they'll finish or not, so check back on the forecast there later on to see the timeline. Rain is also in the forecast at Wrigley for the Cubs and the Dodgers. It looks light, so they should be able to play, but I would monitor that for sure and just keep an eye on it to see if that does change later on. Finally, it's just 46 degrees today at Coors Field. It's already not the best situation to attack because it's at least one very underwhelming offense and two pitchers who get some ground balls, but that does downgrade bats even a bit more. So you can still stack Coors, and we'll talk about that in the stacking section, but it's not full Coors for today because of the low temperature. Hey, baseball fans, the 2021 MLB season is in full swing, and there's no better place to play daily fantasy than with FanDuel. For only $5, you can enter a lineup and compete for a part of the $150,000 prize pool today, with first place taking home $30,000. Monday features 10 games with the Mets playing the Cardinals and the Dodgers taking on the Cubs. Head to FanDuel today and create your daily fantasy lineups. For more details, visit FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. And, of course, we'll have more thoughts on this kind of rocky slate later on today with our 4 p.m. Q&A show. That'll be right here on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. If there is a pitcher or a stack I didn't discuss or one you disagree with me on, feel free to talk to me there. Thursday, it is Monday. Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be a long week. Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern, the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. Make sure you swing by there and get your questions in. Also, a lot of stuff here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. This week, we have MLB, NBA, and NHL as always, but also PGA this week, NASCAR, and I think some UFC as well. So a lot of good things here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, but also if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review. Pitching preview for Monday's main slate. Tyler Glasnow is the highest salaried pitcher on the board at $10,800, followed by Walker Bueller at $10,200. So really good options there at pitcher at the top of the board. Aaron Savali is $9,500. Steven Matz is $93,000. Then we have Shohei Ohtani, Tyler Anderson, and German Marquez as the others at $8,000 and higher. And Glasnow doesn't have the best matchup for tonight, but I still think he's the best option on the slate. He's facing the Angels, who have a 115 WRC plus against righties with just a 21% strikeout rate. This is still since the start of last year. Probably going to transition to just 2021 data in the decently near future, but with samples against lefties still pretty small, clinging on to that 2020 data as of right now. I really don't like using pitchers facing the Angels because of that low strikeout rate. But Glasnow is one of the big exceptions because he has been just absurd so far this year. He added a slider over the offseason, and it's turned into a bunch of strikeouts. It's a 39% strikeout rate with a 2.47 skill interactive ERA. Now, there is some risk in that profile because he does have an 8% walk rate. He has allowed a 7.9% barrel rate, so there's some volatility in here, and that's why the Blue Jays game happened where they hopped all over him for 5 earned runs. That could happen again. He just gets such a huge floor from all those strikeouts. Those strikeouts are points. He's allowed him to get at least 33 points in every start this year. He's topped 60 twice. I am not sure if he can get to 60 this time against this team. There might not be enough strikeouts to make it happen, but I still think that Glasnow has the highest ceiling on the slate. So I am willing to rank him the highest guy in this group. Glasnow number 1 at 10-8. I think that's appropriate for today, and I will have him as my number 1 pitcher for tonight. That doesn't mean he's like a locked-in, no-doubt top guy, though. A lot of times we'll have that situation where we have a guy who definitively is the number 1 guy for me. That's not the case today, because I think that Walker Bueller is in the same tier as Glasnow. I'm going to rank him second here at 10-2. Part of the reason they're in the same tier is because Bueller's matchup is better from a DFS perspective than Glasnow's. Bueller is facing the Cubs. They did show some signs of life yesterday. Big outing for their offense, but they do strike out at a 26% clip. That is 5 percentage points higher than the Angels that Glasnow is facing. And Bueller has looked really solid recently. We talked about this heading into his first start or second start against the Padres, upped his cutter usage, thought that might key off a big run for him, and it has so far, because in those 3 starts with that cutter usage up, he has a 2.85 skill interactive ERA with a 30% strikeout rate and a 3% walk rate. He is letting up a lot of hard contact, though, and that's why he had kind of a Glasnow type outing last week where he let up 5 earned runs against the Reds. So there are similarities here. There are lots of strikeouts to give him a good ceiling, but there is some hard contact to ding his floor a smidge. All in all, I think that Bueller, if we're looking at range of outcomes, I think both his floor and his ceiling are just a tiny bit lower than Glasnow's, both the floor and the ceiling. That's why I'd favor Glasnow in both cash games and tournaments for today. But if you're multi-entry, let's say you got 5 lineups, I think Bueller's in the very same tier. So you could go 3 Glasnow, 2 Bueller, et cetera, et cetera. If you're doing 10 lineups, I could see being even on both. They're very similar. I think that Bueller is a very worthy 1B to Glasnow's 1A. For the third guy, talked about a couple youngsters. Let's talk about a veteran here. Adam Wainwright has been around a very long time, and we've seen a couple different iterations of him even in the past couple of years. The early looks at the 2021 version of Wainwright are kind of fun, though. So I'm going to actually give him a spin here against the Mets. I don't recall the last time I used Wainwright in DFS, but we're there for today. Wainwright is technically on the COVID IL list after a family member tested positive last week. Sounds like he would be good to go. So if you go to FanDuel and see IL next to his name, I'd click it to make sure there's no new news, but it's not an injury. He's just on the COVID IL for right now. He's doing something that we love here on the solo shot, cutting down a bit on his sinker usage in favor of a couple other pitches, and his velocity is also up. The velocity in that sinker is the highest it's been since 2016. His curveball velocity is its highest since that year as well, and it's translating into some strikeouts. For the full season, across 5 starts, Wainwright has a 26% strikeout rate. His CSW percentage, which is called strikes plus strikes looking, is strikes swinging, is 31.6%. That's about 3 percentage points above the league average for starters. So I think the strikeout rate should stick. Even though we did not see this last year, it seems like it's pretty sustainable so far this year. That is despite a lot of matchups with low or mid strikeout teams. He had 10 strikeouts against Washington back on April 20th, 8 his last time out against Philadelphia. And the reason that those two are worth highlighting is because both those teams are in the top half of the league in strikeout rate against righties. That's key because the Mets are also in that range. They rank 8th in strikeout rate against righties. So it's not a plus matchup. As a result, I am going to view both Glasnow and Bueller as being multiple tiers above Wainwright. But Wainwright's doing some good stuff. I believe he can keep it up, and he's $7,200. That's enough to justify some swipes here. I don't really know where I'm going to allocate that salary. I think maybe you go to a couple of the higher guys in the stacks we'll talk about, but I wouldn't go too hard just because the more Wainwright you use, the less Glasnow and Bueller you have, and I think they are definitively the top 2 guys here, but you can get to some for sure. Wainwright worth that, given the salary, given the question marks for sure around Glasnow and Bueller. Everything adds up to being you can get some exposure, just make sure it's not too much. That's pitching. I feel good about pitching for today. I do not feel good about the stacks. So just keep that in mind as we're talking here. Now, the one thing that is kind of helpful is that the salaries on Glasnow and Bueller are not super restrictive. They're both below $11,000. We can work with that. That means we can get exposure to Coors Field. And even though the temperature there is low, I would still like to go there. Between the two sides, I would rather stack the Giants. The Rockies are a very bad offense. Aaron Sanchez is doing a good job of keeping the ball on the ground, good batted ball suppression. The Rockies are still an option. And I will say that because it's a bad slate, they're just not like a great option by any means. The Giants are better. They're facing German Marquez in his second straight start. They got to him in San Francisco last week. He allowed 4 earned runs across 4 innings. He also faced San Francisco in San Francisco back on April 11th and let up 3 earned runs that time as well across 5 2/3 innings. That means that the Giants will be seeing him for the 3rd time already this year and the 3rd time in 5 starts, and they've been good against him in those first 2 outings. Marquez has been fine so far this year, but not dominant. He has a 4.54 skill interactive ERA with a 23% strikeout rate. He's letting up too many base runners. He is getting ground balls, to his credit, and that's why I'm not saying you absolutely must stack the Giants here, but they are the top option on the slate. All things considered, I don't feel tremendous about them. There is definitely some shakiness in their profile, but I would still rank them atop the heap just because stacking is pretty difficult for today. And the good thing is they're very low salaried. Some guys kind of snuck through the cracks from a salary bump perspective going to Coors Field. The big one is Mike Tauchman. First time we talked about the Giants since that trade. He's been hitting second against righties with Mike Yastrzemski out. He's also starting against lefties, and he's playing entire games. So with the Giants, we talk about that a lot. We talk about the guys, okay, will they start, first of all, if we're trying to play in the morning, but also will they play the entire game, or will they leave for a pinch hitter? Tauchman seems pretty safe. It seems like they value him enough to keep him in there for the entire game. So I feel very good in using Tauchman for today. He is only $2,700. That is absurdly low salaried for Coors Field, which means Tauchman's likely the best play on the entire slate. So I think you just use a lot of Tauchman, stack the Giants quite a bit, and go from there. I think they do grade out well enough to feel good about them despite the low temperature for today and despite the ground ball rate from Marquez. I think there's enough there for us to still rank the Giants easily number 1. Now, the top non-Coors stack today for me is going to be the Padres. They're facing Tyler Anderson, who has gotten strikeouts to open up the year. He's going to have to keep those up in order to maintain what he has been doing thus far. And to his credit, Anderson could do that. He's leaning more on his cutter now. It's been a very good pitch for him this year. The problem is that it's not all that different from last year. The velocity is down a tiny bit. The vertical movement is up, but it's pretty similar. And Baseball Savant's numbers, their expected numbers, see some regression coming on that specific pitch, which could lead to some trouble. Specifically, Anderson's letting up a lot of hard contact. So if we see that strikeout rate come down, it becomes a big issue because the hard contact is there. I think that could happen. He has a 9.2% barrel rate against with a 41% ground ball rate. So there's a lot of shakiness in the profile for Anderson if the strikeouts don't stick. And again, I think there's data indicating that they could come down a little bit. The Padres are not a high strikeout team against lefties. That means they should put the ball in play here. That could lead to some more issues for Anderson. So I think it makes sense to stack them here and see if Anderson can keep it up. If he can keep it up, cool. I mean, that's fine. But if he can't, it'd be good for the Padres. So I think it's wise to go at them today and see what happens. We have not seen the Padres facing a lefty recently, but the list of guys you'd want to use there should seem pretty obvious. Fernando Tatis, Manny Machado, Will Myers, and Tommy Pham, assuming that Pham plays today. They can all get on lefties, so I would like all those guys. And I'd also keep an eye on Austin Nola. He just came off the injured list, but he can hit lefties. He's $2,100. If he can hit higher than 8th, just not 8th, anywhere but 8th, I'd be willing to use him here for today. So it is really just, I like to try to find some lefty on lefty spots that I like, but not as much with the Padres. So mostly focusing on the righties here. We'll see if Nola can bump up to make it easier to get to Tatis while still spending up with our pitchers. The third stack is very risky. I know, shocker. Given the way I've been talking about the slates for today, third stack is scary because Kyle Hendricks is a very good pitcher, great pitcher. He's not a great DFS asset because he doesn't get strikeouts, but he is a great actual real-world pitcher. This year's been rough, and now he has to face the Dodgers on a slate that's thin on really good stacks. I think there is enough there to give the Dodgers a run. The velocity for Hendricks is down a bit. The movement on his curveball isn't quite as good. That could explain the fall off, and it's a big fall off from where he's been in the past. He has a 4.57 skill interactive ERA with a 19% strikeout rate and a 7% walk rate. Now, those peripherals alone, those specific numbers are always going to be kind of underwhelming for Hendricks just because he was never a high strikeout guy. But it didn't matter what he did in the strikeout department because he did such a good job of limiting hard contact. That's not happening so far this year. He has already allowed more barrels this year than he did last year in almost 60 fewer innings. His ground ball rate is down to 32% from 47%. He's not getting any whiffs. So basically, all of these skill-centric metrics have deteriorated for Hendricks, and he's not excelling in the one area that really kept him humming in the past. That's really tough against an offense as good as the Dodgers. Now, Hendricks could get back to it tonight, which is why they're not higher on this list, but there is enough there for me to give them a swipe and see what happens. So I'm going to go with the Dodgers here against Hendricks. It is risky, so I understand if you don't want to go there, totally fine. I don't really want to go here either, but I think just for today, I do think that they're number 3. We saw A.J. Pollock go nuts over the weekend, and we typically use him in DFS against lefties. Hendricks, obviously not that. But I still think Pollock works pretty well here because if we look at just this year against righties, Pollock has a 39% hard hit rate and a 41% fly ball rate. Really good power numbers. So you have to make sure he's in there because he is a righty, and he's facing a righty. But for $2,100, I'm okay chasing these points with Pollock. It is worth mentioning that they're not on the West Coast tonight, so the lineup actually should be out before lock for once. So that does help for the Dodgers. They tend to wait all the way up to the 3-hour mark, but that does help for today. And I think that Pollock grades out really well. So Pollock, Tauchman, maybe Austin Nola, Will Myers, guys like that, all good options. Tommy Pham as well, all good options to make it easier to get to Glasnow and Bueller as your top pitcher, which makes it easier for me to say, load up on them, maybe sprinkle in some Wainwright to increase your exposure to guys like Mookie Betts, like Corey Seager, and like Fernando Tatis as well. Let's finish up here, things to watch. And once again, there are a couple of guys here to note with low pitch counts in case you are looking at just the ratios and not looking at the depth. The 2 guys for today are Dane Dunning and Vince Velasquez. Dunning has been in the low 60s or 70s from a pitch count perspective for each start. That's unlikely to change. It seems like it's a philosophy. It's working out pretty well, so I don't blame him. He's not a consideration for DFS, and he's also pitching well enough where I don't want to stack against him either. Velasquez has been 63, 67, and 74 pitches. It is 3 longer outings. He's probably going to stay around there too, kind of on shaky ground in terms of keeping his rotation spot. So neither guy's in play for DFS, even though they do get some strikeouts. I would just cross them off and move on. There are still some murky starter situations as of 9 o'clock this morning, so let's run through those for now so you know what to look out for. Looks like the Mets are going to do a bullpen day against the Cardinals. The Cardinals' offense isn't very good, so not really itchy to go there. I would need an extremely bad situation to get behind it. Looks like Eric Swanson may start for the Mariners as part of a bullpen game. He just got called up from the alternate site. He'd likely max out at 50 or so pitches, I'd bet. Not some shutdown guy. I would be fine using hitters against him. I just think the O's do get downgraded quite a bit whenever Anthony Santander is out. So makes it tough for a full stack. They're better this year without Santander than they were last year, given that they have Mancini and Franco, but still not a place I really want to go for today. So keep an eye on the situation for the Mets and the Mariners, but as of right now, probably not going to be stacking. I don't think it's the worst idea on the planet to stack the Blue Jays against Frankie Montas. Montas, very volatile. He could have a really good start tonight, which is why I didn't put them in stacks. But he's having some down nights as well. And it makes sense, too, because he profiles that way. He's letting up a lot of balls in play. There's a lot of hard contact against him. So they could blow up. And I'd like to have some exposure to the Blue Jays as a result of that. But the ability to get whiffs from Montas does lower me on the situation as a whole. So the Blue Jays are a consideration for sure for today, but not a priority. I would rank the other 3 stacks we discussed before above them, but potentially the Rockies as well, even though they are bad, and Aaron Sanchez does get a lot of ground balls. So the Rockies and Blue Jays, the other 2 teams to consider outside of the 3 stacks we mentioned. Pretty rough slate overall for stacking. And again, I think that might push me towards skewing away from cash games for tonight. But there is enough there where you could justify it. And we can feel okay for tournaments, but there's no surefire stack, no risk-free stack available on the board for today. Maybe something will change, and we'll talk about that this afternoon. So make sure you swing back by 4 p.m. Eastern today on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. Ask any questions you've got about this tonight's slate or about general MLB DFS process. We'll talk about today, 4 p.m. Eastern, YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter. Also, make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, the Google Podcasts. We are on SoundCloud. I think we're on radio.com. Wherever you get your podcast, you can find us just by searching for the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. If you like what you hear, make sure you leave a rating and review as well. If you have questions for me before 4 p.m., I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for setting up the video side of this broadcast for today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you. We might need it for tonight's slate. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow. This has been the solo shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.